back, man.
Taking a couple weeks off.
Yeah, we did.
Thank you, church family, for listening. Our regular listeners, new listeners. Spiritual Gaps, where we talk about spiritual things in an easy way. We reflect on some sermon stuff.
Yeah, it comes out every Wednesday. It's meant to fill the gap between Sundays.
Sunday to Sunday.
Spiritual gap. Fill the spiritual gap in your life.
Another T-shirt to be made. Fill the spiritual gap by listening to the spiritual gap. Every Wednesday.
Also, just read your Bible.
That's a much better option.
That's a really good idea. So we gather and we talk about a lot of random stuff.
Yeah, we do. And in our pursuit of learning, the overall theme of our podcast has been learning to slow down. And really, it's learning to slow down. And by doing that, it's lowering our anxiety.
Yeah.
Because by lowering anxiety, it means you're slowing down.
So yesterday, because I practice what we teach.
It's a positive thing.
Yeah, I took a half day of solitude. Brooke and I have been, it's been a little hectic. We have another little guy in the house.
As someone who has children, Bryce,
yeah,
there's no such thing as a full day of solitude.
I mean, in theory, I could wake up early before everyone gets up and then come back after everyone goes to bed. But
that's true. That's true.
I don't know that would be super fair to my wife.
That's true.
But no, after church yesterday, got home, we all had lunch, and then I just went and walked around the forest for like 3 or 4 hours, and it was
the
really
woods.
Good. Yeah.
And I was practicing slowing down because the last 2 weeks, 1 week, I was on vacation with my family at the beach, the salty coastal air.
Nice. Away
from technology and that type of stuff. And then last week I was working on our next sermon series that we start this Sunday, going through the book of 2 Corinthians.
Nice.
It's going to be really fun. I'm really excited about it. It talks a lot about the comfort of Christ. 1 weekend we're going to talk about being the aroma of Christ. And Paul talks a lot about being a healthy culture. And then the church had declined. That's the church he cared about. Ugh. He planted the church, so he's kind of like a spiritual father figure for the church. And as someone, you raise children. If your kid starts going a little haywire, I mean, as a parent and as a guardian, you take personal responsibility. It's like, hey, this is my responsibility to put this kid back on the right track.
Yeah, he felt that.
Yeah, so he felt that. So
yeah,
that's pretty cool.
Yeah, I'm excited. I've heard, maybe you're going to talk about this, that the Corinthians are actually kind of more like 1st and 3rd Corinthians, or 1st and 4th. Because there's, like, you read them and you're like, oh, he's responding to something that they wrote to him.
Yeah.
And so there's like a back and forth, but we don't have the letters from the Corinthians to Paul.
One of the challenges of the epistles, the letters that Paul wrote, is oftentimes we don't know why he's writing the letter. Like, we don't know the original reason. And that's why some people use some of these letters in some intense, like, debates on, like, women in the church as, like, egalitarianism, complementarianism, and all arguments in between.
Yeah.
And Paul sometimes has strong arguments. Or, like, for instance, 1 Timothy, 2 Timothy, Titus, those letters are written to specific people for a specific purpose and for a reason. And we don't know the original reason, so there has to be some interpretation in there. Yeah. But yeah, you're correct. From what I was reading even this morning, there's believed to be 4 letters, actually.
Wow.
That Paul exchanged with the Corinthians. 2 Corinthians is in response. There was a letter in between that was supposedly an awesome letter. And by that, I mean brutal. Like, called them out.
They're like,
yeah.
We don't want to keep this
Kind of pulled off the belt, gave him a little pow-pow, little conversation, I guess. Actually, I was reading today, some theologians think that because if you read through 2 Corinthians, the last 3 chapters are a lot more intense. And so some people think that he kind of tagged on that same letter at the end so they could remember. No one knows. It's all speculation on that front. But
it's kind of like, when you like reply to an email and it's got the previous reply.
Yeah. Yeah. So you can see.
As per my last
part
email.
of it's like, to me, is like no more warnings. As a parent, when you remind your kid, you're like, hey, don't do that. It's dangerous. Don't do that. And then they do it. Or they do, like, you've warned them enough times that, like, okay, like, no. I'm not messing around anymore, buddy.
Yeah.
You know, like,
yeah.
or little lady, whatever it is, like,
Yeah.
you have lost all your warnings. Now we go to stage consequence.
Yeah.
You're for our family, the biggest consequence is you're missing out on the next movie. So we'll watch a family movie, and they'll be in their bedrooms
Oh.
doing whatever they want, but not watching the movie. And
Oh,
they do
man.
not like that.
They can hear it.
Yeah,
know?
yeah, they can
Like-
hear it. They're like, oh, what? You know,
Yeah.
it's like, hey, you were warned. That was your choice. So
Yeah. It's
Um,
that's always like, I don't know, for me that's always like the hardest part of parenting is you're like, I don't want to dish out a consequence.
No one
That's
does.
not really
it's
what
terrible.
It's not what I'm here for, man. I'm here for playing on the playground
Yeah.
and building Legos.
And I think that's what Paul talks about. Like, he says, like, man, it pains me to write these things, but I
Yeah.
do it out of love. Because if
Yeah.
I don't say these things, it's not loving for me to allow you to. In this case, they had some people come in their church who were false teachers and leading them astray. And so he sees that, and you're like, they're being manipulated, probably.
Mhm.
And it's unloving to let them continue to follow in
Yeah.
that manipulation.
Yeah.
So, but a lot of words about comfort. It's a really encouraging book because I, from what I was reading, most theologians believe that Paul wrote 2 Corinthians after he heard back from the church. Basically, they're like, we're sorry. Like we receive your rebuke, and we're gonna, like, we want to change.
Dude.
And so then he writes them 2 Corinthians in, like, hey, the first chapter is just so encouraging. It's like the comfort of Christ. It's like, it's all good. Like, it's okay. So that's cool. But then at the end, he pulls out the bell
Yeah,
at the end
yeah.
of the letter. And so, I mean, in those days, I think it took a long time to write a letter. It's not like in our day and age, you write an email. So he could have received some information. There could have been a small sect of people in the group, in the church that he was dealing with at the end, you know? But I'm excited to walk through. It's a fun book.
But the Bible Project has a really, really good series on letters of the New Testament.
Yeah, actually, I watched the Bible Project's video on 2 Corinthians. It's good.
Yeah.
It's like 7 minutes.
The whole podcast, because they do like 10 hours worth of podcast episodes just on letters. That's really interesting. And I remember one of the big takeaways from it was like Paul's letters are like the longest Greek letters that we have ever.
Specifically Romans, I believe.
Like nothing comes close.
Yeah.
And I didn't know this either. The New Testament, at least Paul's letters, are organized by length.
Ah,
Yeah.
That makes sense
So
now
you
I
have
think about it.
Romans first, and
Yeah.
then it just gets shorter from there.
yeah.
And then like the Corinthians are obviously in order. I don't
Yeah.
know which one is
Yeah, first 2 Corinthians, yeah.
longer or shorter. But
First one's longer, I think.
but the most like Greek literature that we have in the form of letters comes from Paul.
Yeah.
It's like nothing else is even a close second.
The
which is
Bible, just
really
as a
fascinating.
historical document, is fascinating.
Yeah, because there's a lot of people that study the Bible that are atheists, like staunch atheists
Yeah,
or
absolutely.
agnostic, but they're like, this is like incredible history. So
Yeah,
they
they-
don't believe any of it.
They don't believe it's inspired.
Yeah.
I think they would believe in some historical events, but they don't
Right.
think it's an inspired word of God.
Yeah.
For sure.
And there's a lot of people that have studied the Bible from that standpoint that have then converted,
Yeah.
which I think is interesting.
Yeah.
There's a guy who wrote a book.
We're looking it up.
The laptop made a return.
A guy wrote a book. What book is this called?
It's a guy, The Sacred Mushroom and the Cross.
I've never heard of it.
Is by a guy who was studying the Dead Sea Scrolls.
Okay.
John Allegro.
John Allegro.
Yeah,
Never heard of
and
it.
so I believe, if I remember right, he was studying the Dead Sea Scrolls, and he believes, based off of his interpretation, that a lot of these things, like the Eucharist and things like that, are based off of like kind of like ayahuasca type ceremonies. It's like John's revelation is like, he consumes some mushroom or potion or something and goes
Wow.
on this long.
That sounds kind of wild.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm not saying I believe that by any means.
Yeah,
I was
it's
just worth pointing out. Maybe it's not worth pointing
Speaking
out.
of like the crazy vision type deals, in the book of 2 Corinthians, Paul talks about, he's kind of like proving his apostleship. And he talks about a vision that he had 14 years prior to writing that letter, where it says he was caught up to the third heaven. and at least in the new NLT defined it as the third heaven. They translate it as the third heaven. And there were sounds that he heard that he couldn't even, like explain.
Oh.
And I'm like, this is fascinating stuff.
I've never even thought. I've thought about like, oh, you're gonna see things that you don't understand. Like the first time you see like, if you go to like first time you see a kangaroo, you're like, what the heck is that?
Kangaroos are hardcore.
Makes
Have you
no
seen
sense.
the memes that there's more kangaroos in Australia than there are
People?
like, yeah. Oh, and it's like, there's so many millions of kangaroo in Australia. Like if you train them to be an army, they could like take over small countries. Because there's so many kangaroos.
That's so. I
It's
didn't
a
know there
meme
was
somewhere.
That many kangaroos.
I forget which country they were going to invade, but yeah, I've used an army of kangaroos. It's kind of hilarious to think about. They're hardcore though, man. They punch and stuff.
Yeah, that's wild. But I've never thought about like hearing things that you can't explain.
It's bizarre to think about, man. There's sounds, and I mean, there's some things we experience. Like the eclipse happened for the East Coast. Well, and not just East Coast, the path of totality, which was like mostly on the East Coast, but through Texas, I want to say too.
Yeah.
But that happened in Salem. When was it?
2018.
2018? Yeah. No, before that. 2017.
No, before that,
2016?
2016.
2016. I think it was whatever it was. Fall, summer, 2016. Anyways, yeah. Because I don't think I'd started at the church yet. So it's 2016. I remember going up. I went to my sister's house. We went up on a hill, little like field by her house, and we sat there and just experiencing. Were you in Salem for that?
Yeah.
Just experiencing that eclipse was the most. Honestly, it was the most fascinating experience I've ever had in my entire life.
Yeah.
Because it's 10 o'clock in the morning, the sun is up, birds are chirping. And that's a warmer day. I want to say it was like 70 degrees that day.
So it was in August.
Was it August? Yeah. So it was a warmer day. And just to see the sun be covered up and like the temperature dropped 15 degrees like instantly.
Yeah.
And it was dark. The birds stopped chirping. And it was completely surreal. And it just makes you think like it was the most spiritual type of experience because I put the pieces together with like, well, it's like when Jesus died on the cross, how the sun was darkened, all that type of stuff.
Yeah.
And just experiencing something that's so it seems unnatural because we experience the sun going up and down every day.
Yeah.
And only if you're in a certain spot, but you experience this, it's just different. Dude, it was bizarre.
Yeah. It's so weird.
It felt like a miracle almost. Like this is insane.
Well,
and it kind of is a miracle, I guess, because of the odds that happened are, I mean, it's an argument for a creator. There's no way that's just like.
Well, even crazier than that the moon is the perfect distance between the Earth and the sun, that it only blocks out the center of the sun, and you still get the.
Yes.
Like it's not like the moon. If the moon was 3 times bigger, it'd just be pitch black.
Yeah.
And you wouldn't see anything. But it just. Like the moon and the sun are the same size in the sky, so you still get the corona, like the outside atmosphere of the sun.
And you see like the little rays kind of going around or whatever.
Yeah, it's incredible.
It's incredible. And again, it's the most incredible thing I've ever experienced and witnessed in my life on like a physical nature. Like it felt supernatural to me because it's just like, this is insane.
Yeah, very strange.
So strange, but so cool. So I think it's like that whole miracles. On a biblical level, they don't happen very often. So I think when they do, that's why it's in the Bible. So it's like written record because it's so rare. Mm-hmm. And I don't know, you could argue the eclipse is a miracle. It's not really. It's just science, but God set it up that way. But just experiencing something like that, it's just, it's incredible.
Well, it's like rainbows, like.
It's incredible.
I wouldn't say a rainbow's like a miracle. Like it's a scientific consequence of what happens when light shines through particles of water in the atmosphere. But there is definitely spiritual significance to rainbows and how they God didn't have to set up the universe that way. He could have made nothing happen when light goes through water droplets,
I guess you could argue that almost the existence of life is a miracle in general.
Yeah. I mean,
you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like you read all the scientific books that arguing for creationism, meaning that there was a creator, that things on planet Earth had to be so specific for life to thrive.
Yeah.
And if they're off by 0.1%, then it's all we're all dead.
I feel
It's
like
crazy.
That's the interesting. You know, we ran into a gal at Wallace Marine Park, and we were talking about creation and stuff. And I think the interesting thing, you know, people are like, oh, here's my thing with aliens. Yeah, we're going there.
We're going straight to
We're
aliens.
going there. My thing with aliens is like they would have had a conversation with us by now. You know, like it's like Bigfoot. It's like I think we would have found one. You know, we've been looking for this thing for like 150 years. I think we would have found one.
A Bigfoot?
Yeah. And aliens. You know, like
my wife I was talking to my wife about aliens because I stopped listening to the Blurry Creatures podcast just because I was getting. I mean, I just listen to better things than is Bigfoot real or not. Some of the stuff they talk about is very fascinating, but
it is.
I'm with you. Like the aliens thing, I'm like, man, we're created in the image of God. The percentage, I guess the biggest argument is the universe is so expansive that you could argue like it's possible.
Yeah.
Because God is like the universe is continually expanding outward.
Yeah.
Like, it's infinite. Because God's infinite.
The infinite nothingness just keeps getting bigger.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like, because they can point like where God said, you know, let there be light, and boom, it's been expanding ever since.
Yeah.
And so basically that's infinite. And so that's kind of like the whole argument with like evolution and like the Big Bang is that if you give something enough time, anything's possible.
Yeah.
Because you have the argument, all the arguments of like, oh, you have Mr. Potato Head. You put all the pieces in him in a pillowcase and you shake it up. Like there's no way it's coming out perfectly.
Yeah.
But you could argue like if you do it for a bazillion years, maybe.
Exactly.
You know?
Yeah.
When the reality is no, it's impossible.
Yeah.
But scientifically, if you give it enough time, you could argue that basically anything's possible.
Statistically, yes. And I think that's to me, I look at that as I'm like, I think that makes our life on this planet even more valuable.
Absolutely.
You know? I really think it does. Like I don't think we're ever going to colonize Mars.
Yeah. You're going to tell Elon Musk that. He's going to be very disappointed. You never know. I don't know about that stuff. Can we colonize Mars? I mean, I think for me, it became not, I mean, when I found out that it takes, I think, multiple years to travel to Mars.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah.
Is that what it is? You should look it up.
Yeah.
How long does it take to travel to Mars? Would it take to travel to Mars? I think it was like, I could be completely wrong. I thought it was 3 years, but it could be months. I don't know. But I just can't see anybody that's going to.
7 months.
Okay, 7 months. So that's not as awful as 3 years. So it's 7 months, but still 7 months is insane. And so to go there and back, that's just over a year.
Yeah.
So that's a tough sell. And actually this kind of brings me to an interesting topic that I kind of wanted to talk about which was fear. Because I think part of like the whole Mars thing is like, well, what if this planet like can't support life anymore? Which I think the argument for that means is like this planet can, I believe, can support twice as many people. I think we have the agricultural land to make food for twice as many people. And in fact, you could argue that one of the biggest threats to humanity right now is population collapse, which is already happening in, I want to say I saw Bulgaria. There's been like a 15% decline, and they predict a higher decline by 2050.
I saw another one recently too. Another country, another large like Western country that's going through.
Japan, I believe.
Yeah,
is beginning,
Japan.
very beginning. And so the thing about population decline
too.
is that right now it's not a big deal because it's very beginning and it's just starting.
But it's exponential.
You can't catch up.
Yeah,
it's like you can't be like, all right, everybody have 10 kids. It'll take decades.
Yeah.
If not centuries to get back to a track when you're growing as a population. So like in the United States, one of the biggest problems right now, I think, is you have the boomer generation, which is one of the largest generations in human history. Then you have millennial generation, which is I don't know if we're larger than the boomer generation. I'm not sure. But the way that our country's set up is like Social Security and all that type of stuff. It's always been you have a larger generation that's working than the retired generation. And so someone could retire and you have such a large workforce, then everything financially is fine. But if you have, let's say, a large group of people who are retiring, millions and millions of people retiring, and you have less people now in the workforce than you did 20, 30 years ago, that's a problem.
It's a big problem.
That's a problem.
Yeah.
Social Security, no money.
Yeah.
income less, yet you're trying to support all of these people. So lots of those challenges. Anyways, but like the Mars thing, it's like, oh, the whole world's declining, all this type of stuff, which I think on a biblical level, it's like, yeah. I mean, we've talked about this before. Like, we want to do the best thing that we can to take care of our environment and our cities and our world 100%. We don't want to litter. We don't want to, do things that on purpose that brings down the environment, I guess. I don't know if that's the proper way to define it. And what's fascinating to me, someone sent me a meme about this, is more often in the Bible than almost any other thing, Jesus says, do not fear, or the Bible says, do not fear. Yet, in the clickbaity world of YouTube,
I'm just going to open up YouTube right now and see what the top...
everything is like, everything's going to end. There was some fear this last weekend. I mean, it's awful that we're in this situation, the world's in this situation, but Iran launched an attack on Israel.
And then
I believe all the missiles were intercepted.
99%.
99%.
Yeah.
And now they're like, all right, we're done. I don't think they want to start anything. I think they just want to show a little force that they're there. I don't know.
Show a little force, and they were like, oh, dang it.
Yeah, something like that. But anyways, and so immediately though, I think I was scrolling on Twitter or something like that, and everyone's like, oh, here we go, World War III, like it's all over. This is the end. The Israeli government's up in the air in their like Air Force One type plane. The world is over. And then you see like Christian YouTubes with the stock market, like everything's gonna burn. The country's going down the tubes. The world is ending. Nuclear war, whatever, all this type of stuff. And then it's like, what does the Bible say? It says, do not fear. That doesn't mean we have our heads in the sand, obviously.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean we can't have concerns, obviously. Doesn't mean we don't try to make things better in this world, of course. But at the same time, it says we don't have to fear. And it's just like so sad to me that so many Christians on social media and YouTube and all this stuff are like, because it makes them money.
Yeah.
Because if you have clickbaity things, and I get that, you have clickbaity things. I mean, technically speaking, if we title this podcast World War III ? Technically speaking, that's clickbaity-ish, I guess.
I'm gonna do that now. Now that you mentioned that.
But we're saying do not fear. We're not like because like we can pray, we can have concerns, we can absolutely, but we also don't. Scripture says we don't have to fear.
Yeah. All right. Here are the top. Here's like the trending news.
Okay.
Things. Pentagon holds press briefing after U.S. helps Israel. ...
Okay.
Iran issues warning to the U.S. after Israel attack. Retired general. Iran would use nukes if they had them.
Yeah, like that one. Like, oh my gosh. Holy smokes, nuclear war.
You're like, I gotta watch that, Fox News. Thanks. Rust Armor, Hannah Gutierrez, Reed, sentenced to 18 months.
Okay, so these are secular ones. So you find any Christian YouTubers?
Christian news.
Oh, it's
Sydney church stabbing.
Oh, gosh. That's still secular news.
Sydney church stabbing.
There's one.
News about Iran, Israel.
Like that one right there. War, Iran strikes.
Which one?
That one right there. Just the thumbnail.
Oh, this one?
No, the one above right there.
Oh, yeah. Oh, that's CBN. Oh, yeah. He's studied 1,000+ near-death experiences and says this is what he believes. This is why he believes they prove the Bible.
So here's my deal.
Second Coming of Christ, Billy Graham classics.
Again, I'm not saying.
No, hang on. One more. Really good.
Let me hear it.
Wars and rumors of wars. Lebanese Christian leader murdered in political assassination.
Oh my heavens.
Yeah, that's all CBN.
That's all Christian broadcast news. So again, I guess it's important we are informed. I'm not saying we shouldn't talk about these things. I guess my biggest complaint is the way that it is communicated to people. It's all like nuclear attack incoming. Everybody run for your lives. Yeah. Instead of like, hey, let's, as we've talked about this whole theme of this podcast, slowing down, being with God, functioning in our lives out of a place of rest, restoration, thought, being one with Christ to the best of our abilities, and tackling these issues, instilling and displaying the fruits of the Spirit. Love, joy, Amen. Peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, and self-control.
Yeah.
Like, that's what I feel like we should really just focus on as Christians in the United States, but also like around the world. But all I can speak to is context of what we know and what I know, and specifically the city of Salem, but in the context of the United States of America. But yeah, it just makes me sad. It's like fear, fear, fear. Everything's going to end. The world's going to end. All these things. And the reality is, like climate change stuff, there's manageable problems. There's things that we can do, things that we can change to make things better. War is a horrendous thing. We pray for peace. We don't want to see anybody die in a war. The Russia-Ukraine thing is horrendous. It's been going on for... You know what's interesting now I think about it? No one's really talking about that very much anymore.
No, I was just thinking about that the other day.
I haven't heard about it in weeks.
Like, it's completely, like, the Russia-Ukraine thing is just completely gone off the face of the earth.
Every once in a while it pops back up. Mostly it's a funding thing at this, this level. That's
but
the
it's
news
not
you
about the war anymore.
see. Lives being lost and stuff. Yeah.
Like, everything's about the Israel-Hamas stuff now.
Yeah.
You know?
Sadly, potentially, because it's more of a political deal.
Yeah.
And I think the political entities want to show
and it's fresh.
support.
And it's fresh. You know, like, I think people are getting a little bit, I don't want to say tired. What's the, there's like a phrase for it.
If it bleeds, it leads.
I mean, no,
That phrase?
People are just getting,
compassion fatigue?
yeah. I'm just like, okay, we've been here. Like, it's like,
but here's
you
the
just
thing.
keep
Have
hearing
we been
about it.
conditioned almost to, like, we cannot even regulate because we're anxious all the time. We can't even process this
100%.
information. So, for instance, we talked about the Russia-Ukraine thing, and it'll come back in the headlines. Something else spikes up and something like that.
Yeah.
And it's horrendous. And what's happening in Iran and Israel and Hamas and all that stuff, and it's the tension, the lives being lost. It's horrendous. But also, you rewind. I was a year ago, an entire town in Hawaii burned down.
Yeah.
Nobody's talking about that.
Nobody sent money to that. I shouldn't say nobody. But
Yeah, I think some people sent some money.
But like, we send way more overseas than we do.
But I think my point.
It's like, it's gone.
I think my point is no one's talking about it anymore. Like, it's old news.
Yeah.
But the people are like, I believe many lives were lost in line.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of families, like, they're still dealing with a lot of grief.
Well,
but then people are like,
yeah.
like,
Well,
it's moved on.
and even bring that closer to home of the families in Santiam Canyon of those fires that happened in 2020. Like, they're still rebuilding. They're still trying to, figure their lives out. And we forever, it was like Canyon Strong or whatever was the hashtag on everything. But now it's like no one talks about that anymore. That's kind of like,
what's
gone
interesting?
by the wayside.
From what I've been told, like, I haven't had any really deep loss of somebody that's like, I haven't lost any of my parents yet. I lost my grandmother when I was 10. All my kids are alive by the grace of God. My wife, she's alive by the grace of God. But what I've heard is when you lose somebody that is close to you, one of the most challenging things outside of just the shock and the horror of the whole thing, one of the most challenging things is just going back to normal life after, like, the funeral service. When it's like, all right, like, you've done all the challenging work of the funeral company, the funeral service, you ran the service, you've done the cremation or the burial, and the service just ends. You wake up the next day, and it's like that you're supposed to live your life.
Yeah.
Yet with that new burden.
Yeah.
But then mostly, at that point, you're not on people's minds for the most part. You maybe have close friends, family members checking in on you. But other than that, like, it's moved on to the next thing.
Yeah.
And so you have to learn, like, what does it mean to live your life now with that loss? And so thinking about all those people, like in Lahaina, all over the world, when we just hop from news story to news story. And again, I think we've kind of conditioned ourselves to, like, this is just the whole idea of if it bleeds, it leads. So we read headlines and we're like, oh, that's terrible. And the next day we're like, oh, we were another headline. Oh, that's terrible. But then we forget the headline from yesterday.
Yeah.
So we're not,
Yeah.
we can barely have compassion for anybody because all we see is the negative around the world all the time.
Yeah. No,
It's challenging.
AJ Swoboda talked about that, and then I actually heard another psychologist talking about the same thing of, like after World War II, you had soldiers that came home on boats versus like Vietnam or Korea, you had soldiers that jumped on planes and were home in 3 days.
Mm-hmm. Or less than that, hours.
Yeah. And so, and I was just thinking, when you were talking about that with death, older cultures, I know like Latin American cultures, like, native, like First Peoples, they have like such a high honor for life that like, someone dies, there's like a period of mourning for the whole community,
mm-hmm.
And so it's interesting. And I've heard things about that in other places, like rural Scotland and Europe and stuff, where it is different, where it's life is just so much more communal. Yeah.
From what I've heard, I forget what book I read. It might be a Pete Scazzaro book. I'm not sure. But he was talking about how in the culture in the United States is pretty awful at grief.
Yeah.
Where sometimes it's like we even try to view death as a positive, as in like in the Christian world, like, oh, they're with Jesus now. I mean, which is true, but at the same time, for followers of Jesus, but for the same time, we're human.
Well, and Jesus was sad when his
Lazarus
friend died.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think that's the thing. It's a normal human emotion. Like it's how we were made. Like grief is a positive thing to experience as a human being.
Yeah.
And then the whole concept of, I've talked about this in church before, that you can't numb singular emotions. And so what people try to do is not experience all of the painful emotions and only experience the good ones. But the problem with that is you bring down all emotions. So if you don't know grief, you can't know actual joy.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You can't experience that if you just, you used to try to numb everything. And so you lose someone that you love, someone that's close to you, friend, family member, and we immediately just want to go to celebration of life. And I get the mentality behind it. I'm not saying that's wrong, but I guess it's how can we really grieve as a community, as you said, where it's not just on an individual, but it's grief together. I was actually just texting with a friend about it. They have someone they're walking with right now that a friend that is just losing someone to cancer. And we just want to make the situation better, but you can't.
Yeah.
You can't just be like...
Yeah. I mean, you go back to... Yeah, we do, even, like you're saying, as believers, we view death as like, like you're with Jesus. Like, that's great.
Yeah.
But you look back to Genesis, and we were never supposed to die.
That's the whole... Yeah,
like,
that's why it's so painful.
That was never the plan.
Yeah.
And so it is painful because, like, they're not here now.
Yeah. It's one of the most bizarre experiences, not bizarre, just my grandfather passed away in 2020. And like he's just always been in my life. I wouldn't say we're ever like super close, but when he passed away, it's just the mentality like I can't call him right now. Like I couldn't just show up at his doorstep, couldn't ask him. It's like a reality wall that you hit, like, oh, like they're actually gone. I can't write him an email.
Yeah.
And I think we've talked about this and how this kind of goes a different avenue, but how AI is really potentially going to jack people up because they're not going to be able to grieve. And it's actually, I think it was a Preston Sprinkle podcast I was listening to where there are potentially some companies, they might actually already do this, like at funeral homes, they may sell services that if you like submit some video of your loved one, where it has recordings of their voice, then the funeral company for probably like $10,000 or something ridiculous like that, they'll give you basically like an Alexa bot in the voice of your loved one that you can talk to, and it can respond.
Like, hey Nana, remind me what that blueberry muffin recipe was.
Yeah, and it would respond in the voice of your Nana.
So crazy.
And so the idea, like, man. Grief, man, it's just crazy. Actually, even in the modern world today, even before AI and all that stuff, with video, it's really challenging because you could have a video of someone. I think about like actors who have passed away. You watch a Hollywood movie and it's like nothing changes.
No one in
for
this
you.
cast is alive.
Yeah, no, like you watch an older movie, like, oh, everyone is dead.
Yeah.
But you can't, like, you know what I mean? It's weird. But back in, pre 1900, I don't know when cinema started coming. I think it was like 1900s, early 1900s, 10s, 20s, 1930s. Before that, like there was no, I don't know, visual evidence.
Yeah.
Like maybe you would have one photo. I think that was like late 1800s. If you're rich, you could get like one singular photograph.
Yeah.
But other than that, like there's like if someone's dead, they're gone.
Mm-hmm.
There's no video. There's no voicemail. And so I do think it's in this day and age, it's going to be a lot more challenging to grieve because we have to experience that loss.
Mm-hmm.
Like we could go back and watch videos. We could scroll through their social media page, watch all the Insta reels they did, and in the future AI and all this type of stuff. Like that's really tricky to navigate, and I think it's actually going to be it's almost going to make it more painful because not only are you going to have a harder time grieving, but what's left of your loved one is not.
It's not them.
It's not them.
Yeah. I mean, there's so much, and there's so much like disassociation when it comes to stuff like that of like, well, like what does it do to your brain to like keep trying to trick it? I know Andrew Huberman talks about this with like pornography of like what it does to your brain to convince your brain, because your brain, just as humans, like
scientifically wired.
We are wired to be attracted to the opposite sex.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, what does it do to train your brain to be attached to something that's happening on a TV screen? And it destroys your brain. So, like, what do you, like, take that another step further of, like, now, like, you're trying to build this emotional attachment to this fabrication of your loved one that you've built through images and voice, and you've uploaded characteristics and whatever. Yeah. But it's not actually there.
What's fascinating, I believe the scientific term is neuroplasticity. Mm-hmm. Is your brain can rewire itself. And so you can be wired to anything. Yeah. It's not just the opposite sex. You can be wired, like if you've seen that show on TLC, My Strange Addiction. Have you seen that?
No.
You're probably a better person because of it. But I remember one specific episode, like, I don't know if I've ever watched a full episode, but one person was addicted to eating mattress foam. Like they literally could not stop, at least in their words. They could not stop. It was just like little pieces of foam. They're just eating it all day long.
And you're just like, nope, stop it. Stop it.
Yeah. But I'm like, man, it's sad to me. You get to that point, like you can't stop, but your brain can be wired to anything. So as you said, like the pornography thing, one of the reasons it's so damaging is because your brain wires itself to a screen. Mm-hmm. The dopamine hit type of a deal. The encouraging thing is that neuroplasticity exists where your brain can rewire to something healthy if you train it. For instance, I told you a couple weeks ago, I'm learning how to run. I've never ran in my life before. My dad was a runner when he was in his 30s. I just never thought I did like track when I was in high school, but only like the 800, and I was terrible. But I was like, I'm just gonna give it a go. So I started running one night, and I maybe almost made it a mile. I walked like half the time, and then I was just like, I'm just gonna go every night for a month. And over time, you just learn how to run longer distances. Every night you can run a little bit further, and then you run in 2-3 miles, whatever it is. And it's kind of like the same with your brain. You got to start somewhere. One example I heard was like a grass path in your backyard. If you walk in the same path every day for a year, there's going to be no grass growing on that path. You're going to see where your foot is. There'll be no seeds growing, just dirt path.
Yeah.
But if you start walking in a new direction, eventually the old path will have grass again, and you'll form a new pathway. And so that's how in my understanding, I'm not a scientist nor a psychologist, but in my understanding, that's how neuroplasticity works. Yeah. Where the challenge is, though, you have to have a realistic view of, let's say you're addicted to pornography from age 15 to 25. That's a deep
10
pathway.
years. Yeah.
That's a deep pathway. It could be on and off again, but that's a deep pathway. So there is hope. Like there's hope in Jesus. It says in Romans that God will renew our minds, and I think there's scientific implications behind that. Like there will be a physical change in us, rewiring. But again, the challenges with that is it takes work, because to form that new pathway, it means you have to train your brain. Because this is normal. This old way was normal. Now it's like, no, I'm not doing this anymore.
Yeah.
And so I'm wiring something that's healthy. And usually you could do that with work of community. Again, you can't do it by yourself. It's very challenging to do. Community, that's why we're super pro. Therapy, that type of stuff to form healthy pathways towards spiritual maturity and death.
Yeah.
Anyways, so the whole idea with grief, though, is like if we can't really grieve, if there's just like an aura of someone who is not actually them, but like they're there, that's going to mess people up.
Yeah.
Because you lose, again, if you don't know grief, you don't know joy type of a deal. It's just kind of like you're spiritually and emotionally just completely numb.
Just kind of stuck in the stages of grief. You know, like you never make it through to the redemptive aspect of it.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And so the goal is if you are in a community that's safe, you should be able to hopefully process through a lot of that with people who really care about you and who love you. Like I think that's like the goal of the church. I mean, the goal of the church is to glorify Christ and to get people to, believe in Jesus and glorify him in that way. And, but also it's to behave as Christians do. And, tying back to 2 Corinthians, I was reading today, there's like this passages of the unequally yoked stuff, and we've talked about some of this stuff before. I think it's 2 Corinthians 7. But kind of one of my takeaways from that is Christian communities should function differently than the world. And I think what's sad to me is in this day and age, for the most part, it seems like that's not happening.
Well, and I think the stats back that up, the divorce rate inside and outside of the church is the same. You're like, wait a second.
I've heard there's some debates on that, but that's the most common belief is they're the same. I don't know how much evidence there's written down, but yeah, but the example, like the Christian YouTubers that I come across, like it's fear, like it's the same as the secular news sites for the most part.
Well, it's like
I'm not saying 100%, but in churches today, I think as much gossip exists in churches as in secular environments.
Yeah,
like that's not okay.
Yeah, yeah.
That's what I'm saying. Like, there should be there can be, I should say, a difference, and that's what we want to be. We want the Christian community to be different than the world, to be separate, to separate ourselves. That doesn't mean we don't work with other people by any means. It's more of, to me, it's a behavioral thing. That's what 2 Corinthians, Paul's talking about their behavior. This is how we act as followers of Jesus. Again, being filled with the fruits of the Holy Spirit.
Yeah, and you were talking about Romans being transformed by the renewing of your mind. Right before that is do not conform to the patterns of this world. Or like James 1:28 is the same thing of like, keep yourself unstained by the world and go take care of orphans and widows.
And in Paul's context, like in 2 Corinthians, he talks about all the stuff he goes through. He's like whipped, beaten by Jewish leaders, Roman leaders, like everybody. And he goes through all that. And he's like, this is not what we're about. And that's in my weakness, I am strong. Man, that is untrue for people in America.
Yeah.
And we talked about that, up and to the right. Up and to the
Yeah.
right is success. Everything's got to be growing, expansion, more money, all the time. That is how you succeed.
We'll get to this I want to do something from this book in a second. But, I was thinking, we talk about how up and to the right a lot. Up and to the right isn't bad.
No, not at all.
It's the what is the up and to the right that is bad. What are we measuring? Like, are you measuring wealth? Are you measuring, like, who was I talking to the other day? We were talking about like kind of the paradox of like the Bezoses, the Musks, the
Bill
these
Gates.
the super successful people that like what if like what's Bill Gates' relationship like with his kids or his wife?
No, but Oh, he got divorced recently.
Yeah.
So.
Or
Like Jeff Bezos also recently got divorced. I think
or-
Elon Musk's been married 3 times.
yeah, he's got like
Something like
11 kids or something. And I was like, man, I would love to be like a mediocre entrepreneur and a great dad. You know, like what's the, like, I think we just need to change how we're measuring success. Like,
It's the value.
are you measuring success by like, hey, do I make my neighbor envious of my yard? Or do you measure success by like, how many times did we invite our neighbors over for a barbecue this summer? You know, because if you're like, man, okay, this, you know, our goal this summer is to do a barbecue every month. And then your goal next summer is to have a barbecue every other week.
Yeah.
Like, that's a good up and to the right, you know, of like you're building community, like you're having, you know, you're having people over, you're spending time with people, you're, you know, in theory, you know, walking the gospel out in your life. So it's, I don't think up and to the right in and of itself is bad. There are things that it is good to improve over time.
Yeah.
But like what are the core metrics of our life that we look at, you know?
So, you know, I'm right with you. And like, I've been really encouraged, like in our church, we had a record of numerical attendance for Easter Sunday, which was awesome. March was our strongest financial month in 5 years.
Nice.
We baptized 5-6 people on Easter. So that stuff's good. But it's more of like, now, how do we define success? Does that mean we were successful? Well, it depends. And my view of success is, are people, baptism, I guess you could say, yeah, that's success. You want people to come to faith.
Yeah.
But more on a broader level, it's, I want to see people growing and maturing in spiritual depth and maturity.
Yeah.
That means coming to Christ. Like, that's in, obviously, that umbrella, because that's the beginning. That's the baby step, number 1. Believing in Jesus, or being curious, coming and believing in Jesus. And then we want to see on a path of growth. So I define success if someone comes to me, like we did a series called Be Still. I had multiple people come up to me and say, hey, Stephen, we've been working on this breathing exercise as a church, learning to slow down and pray, be less anxious. And I've been practicing this week, and I've been using it. And I'm like, that to me is like,
there you go. Yeah.
That's success.
That's up and to the right.
Because, that's my type of up to the right, because that means somebody is growing in their own spiritual depth and maturity. Because if we work on that,
That's
then we respond instead of out of anxiety, out of, again, the fruits of the Spirit. You can't respond to the fruits of the Spirit if your anxiety is at level 10. And I understand, like, there's constant, some people are, you know, diagnosed anxiety.
Yeah, some people are
medication,
more prone to it.
Yeah. Whatever you need. What I'm saying is, whatever level is your top, I think if we practice together, breathing, solitude, scripture, it should come down. Like, for the followers of Jesus, I don't think it should just be at 100 all the time.
Yeah.
I think we all experience times when it should be 100, but I think that's the hope of, like, we can experience the peace that Scripture talks about.
Yeah. I mean, I think of the, I agree. I mean, I think you look at the life of Jesus, and the dude knew what was going to happen. Whole time he was here, he knew it was going to happen.
100%.
And in the midst of, so I mean, if I knew, I'm like about the age Jesus was when he started his ministry. If I knew that, hey, like in 3 years I'm out of here, you know, like in not a very good way, you know, like I'd be pretty anxious all the time. And you read in Scripture of how often he's going away by himself, how much time he's spending with his friends, you know, all of those, like, I don't think anyone I don't think any person who's walked the earth has had a more stressful job than Jesus. You know,
the weight of the world on your shoulder.
Like, the man took the sins of the world on his shoulders. I don't think it gets more stressful than that.
Yeah.
You know, and yet he's still, I mean, he's God, you know, but but you know, he handled it very well, I would say.
Better than anybody ever could. And what I love about Jesus, there's so many things we could talk about on this, but his patience, because it's like, from what we know, he didn't start his vocational ministry till he was 30.
Yeah.
And back in that that day, I mean, the average lifespan, I don't know what it was, but it wasn't 80 something.
Yeah, it was definitely, they weren't living, well, it's hard, you know. You got
I don't know what it
people that
was.
live into
Probably,
their
if I could
multiple
guess, it was
hundreds.
probably like 50s.
Yeah.
Probably his average lifespan, maybe 60s. I don't know.
Yeah. I don't know,
So
but it's hard though. You got Sarah had kids at 100. You know?
Well, I mean, that's Old Testament stuff, so you could
Okay,
argue things a
okay.
little different. But anyways, Jesus was a carpenter. I mean, he worked with his hands. So some people think he worked with wood. Some people think he was like a stone mason type of a guy.
Mm-hmm.
There's debate.
There's no trees there.
There are definitely trees there, but for 85%, not what I don't know the exact percentage. For the majority of his life, he just lived his life.
Yeah.
He communed with God.
Mm-hmm.
I'm putting some assumptions in here, and he worked his 9-to-5 job.
Yeah.
And he didn't start his vocational ministry until he was 30.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of us would be like, well, like, that's not successful. Like, he was being paid. We don't define as being with God as success.
Yeah.
But that's all Jesus did.
Yeah.
And then when it was his time, like, he was patient. When it was his time, like, he was like, pedal to the metal. Let's do this.
Yeah.
Yet there are still times where he says, don't tell people. He would heal people and say, don't tell anybody.
Hey,
Like, my time's not yet.
Keep your mouth shut.
Be quiet. And my time's not come. And then in 3 years, Jesus did more than any of us could ever do in our entire lifetime.
Yeah. In 3 days, he did more than any of us could do.
In 3 days, he did more than us could ever do in our entire lifetime. So all that to say, it's like we get anxious, like in our American world context, like if we haven't reached a certain point by a certain age, like, oh, I'm 30, like I should be doing these things, or I'm 40, or I'm 50, whatever. And we think like, oh, my time has passed. God can't use me anymore. When sometimes it's like God was preparing you all those years in your life for this specific moment.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so that really encourages me about Jesus, though.
Yeah.
He's just like, he had such a faith in God, and he was just with God that he just knew.
Yeah.
It's just, his life is just incredible.
I've got a cool. Oh, dang it!
All right, we'll close with this.
Bookmark
We're almost
fell
at an
out.
hour.
We got to hit an hour though.
Yeah, we
'cause
will.
We've been going a little short
We're
lately.
going short. Okay.
Aaron called me out.
He did?
He's like, yeah, it's been easier to listen to you guys because you guys are going shorter. And I was like, well, we gotta.
I don't know if that's a call out. I feel like that's a
But it was more of I took it as more of a like. We need.
slacking. You guys doing 45-minute episodes? What is this?
I'm like, my goal's always been an hour.
yeah, we want to
for
be
an
the type
episode.
of podcast where you have to listen to it in 2 car trips, not just one.
Yeah. See, I remember telling people that I listen to Joe Rogan, and they didn't understand how I could listen to a 3-hour podcast.
I mean, because you listen to it in like over a span of days.
But I'll like, especially if I'm at a point in like a video project where I'm like organizing stuff or doing color correction or something.
Just
like
in the background.
I have hours where I'm just like, just gonna listen to this dude talk about mushrooms.
All right, let's do it.
Anyways, okay. So this book, started reading in December. I'm a slow reader.
Praying like monks.
Praying Like Monks, Living Like Fools.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's by Tyler Stanton. He's the pastor of Bridgetown.
Yeah.
Yeah. From New York. Really, it's been a really interesting book. Yeah, I've really liked it. It's cool because it's different chapters. The chapter I'm currently on right now is laboring in prayer.
Okay.
But then at the end of each chapter, there's like a practical application
Nice.
thing. So it's been really cool. So this one, he's going through First Kings, or he's kind of highlighting some stuff that's happening in First Kings, which First Kings is my favorite book, for starters. Well, it has my favorite passage in Scripture.
Okay.
1 Kings 19, where Elijah's up on the mountain, there's the fire and the wind, and then the giant
The
whisper.
whisper. Yes.
Yeah. So right before that whole fiasco goes down, and Elijah's like, fleeing for his life, there's this, the kingdom's in turmoil. All this crazy stuff is happening. There's a drought, hasn't rained in 3 years. And Elijah tells the king, like, hey, you should go celebrate because it's about to rain. He's like, all right, fine. So, slaughters the fattened calves, does all this stuff. There's this party. Elijah's up on Mount Carmel with this servant. And he's like, hey, go look out towards the sea. And he's like, no, nothing there. And like 7 times he tells him, go look at the sea, go look at the sea, go look at the sea. 7th time, he comes back. He's like, there's a cloud as small as a man's hand rising from the ocean. He's like, okay, go down, tell the king, like, get on your chariot. Rain is coming. And sure enough, rain comes, dumps on everything. And I think that like the beauty for me with this is like, if I pray for rain, say if I'm a farmer and I pray for rain, God doesn't just make it rain on my crops. He makes it rain on everybody's crops. Like the whole community, even if it's like, hey, Farmer Joe over there that I don't like because he's mean and says weird things and sometimes he plows over my corn or whatever. Like, God also makes it rain on that guy's crops. And so he's talking. So Tyler's kind of reviewing some of this stuff, and this paragraph I just thought was so interesting. He said, God doesn't dream of the church on fire. God dreams of the city reborn. God's dream isn't that the church will improve its programs, grow in number, add another worship service, and host an influential conference. All of that is fine. It's just not what God dreams about. God dreams about pouring his spirit out on the whole city. I read that and I was like,
right there.
So good, because man, I think that's so true. And I think a really important thing for us to remember is that, and I think it's part of why we do this podcast, of the time between Sundays. None of us are in the church. You're not even in the church most of the time, like
building. Yeah.
Out in the physical building. Like, we're out in the community. We have our jobs. We have people that we're meeting with, doing stuff out in the community to bring God's kingdom to earth. And I think that's God's, like, of course, God wants people in the church worshiping, doing all that stuff. But God's vision is that his kingdom is brought to earth the other 6 days of the week.
Yeah.
In the rest of the city.
Yeah.
And I just think I just thought that paragraph, I was like, I'm going to frame that.
That's awesome.
Put it on my wall.
Dude, the idea of people being spiritually transformed.
Yeah.
On a citywide level, or on a community-wide level. That's what it's all about. It's our vision statement as a church is to be a movement of Jesus in the Willamette Valley and beyond. And the way I define movement of Jesus is not, as he talked about, like growing in programs, expanding services. The way I define movement, and the way we define movement of Jesus is how we respond and more of our behavior, how we act as Christians. Like if we follow in the example of Jesus and we're doing that in our everyday life, that is a movement of Jesus in my mind. Totally. Like when people are filled again with the fruits of the Spirit, following in Jesus' footsteps, denying themselves, picking up their own cross and following him, that to me is a movement of Jesus.
Yeah.
And that's what gets me excited. The expansion stuff, I mean, honestly, the expansion stuff, and like it's fun on one level, but it also requires an enormous amount of administration.
Yeah.
AJ Swoboda talked about, remember the conference, his opening line was, I never knew that Jesus' resurrection would lead to so much administration.
It's just so good. And I mean, I think that's the hard part about, you want to expand anything, a business, a church, whatever. Like, you have to look into the future. And I think it's so hard for, if you run a business that makes candles, and you're like, people are always going to want candles. I love candles. Yeah. If you're like, well, we're selling a lot of candles right now, so we should expand so that we can, continue to make more candles. But when you're a church, it's so different, because you're like, hey, we're going to borrow money to build a thing, but all the money that comes to us is from people giving to us. So there's a level of faithfulness for sure of and of stewarding your resources, of like, well, hey, God is giving us this opportunity. We have the space, we have the people to do it, we have the resources. Let's expand. But then there's also this like, well, are we expanding for the kingdom's sake? Or are we expanding for the visual sake of like, oh, we, like, how do we make this thing bigger? Because if we look bigger, like, are you trying to look bigger or are you bigger? Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think part of it is, as we talked about before, like the definitions of success. So if your goal is for, this is at least my idea, this is what I'm going for. So this is wrong. I'm gonna be in a bad place. But if our focus is on spiritual depth and maturity and living lives and a healthy culture and following in Jesus' example, then the growth will happen. Yeah. Because Jesus says in Matthew 28, go and make disciples of all nations. Yeah. Like so if you're following Jesus, that's inevitable. If you focus on just the growth of the programs and expansion, then you just fall into the trap of consumerism. And you can say, we have all of these people. Well, maybe you just gained all those people because a church split down the road and now you gained 200 people. Like, is that a positive thing? I mean, I guess you could say so, as in you now have more influence on those people. I mean, I don't know. But it's like, oh, like we've made it. We're successful. When the reality is, no, let's focus on spiritual depth and growth. And then, because, I mean, specifically United States, it's pretty consumeristic, culturally speaking. People go, like, whatever suits their needs the best, oftentimes.
Yeah.
It's what can I get out of this, not what can I give to this. And that's just a reality of the situation that we live in. But in my theory, and it's probably not just obviously for me, it's a common theory, but if you focus on spiritual depth and maturity, other things will fall out of that. Yeah. Hopefully in a healthy way. But it's like our success is spiritual growth.
Yeah. Well,
that's what we want to do.
I think going back to 1 Kings, look at Solomon. When Solomon's up doing all the sacrifices and God comes to him in a dream and he's like, hey, ask me for anything and I'll give it to you because you're David's son and I like David.
Yeah.
And he's like, man, I feel like I'm really immature and I'm supposed to lead this kingdom. How about some wisdom? And God's like, I'm impressed. I'll give you wisdom and I'll give you the riches and I'll give you the, like all the other things you didn't ask for. And I think that's, I was reading, this is what I was reading when I was taking my little half day of solitude yesterday. And I just think that's it's just such an important message for us in this, and just in this era and in this place we live, of like where is your heart in all of this? Like, are you asking for wisdom or are you asking for, are you asking for the riches? Because I think especially, in this time we're in right now, I think just the wisdom of the Lord, be like, how on earth do you parent children, be a good husband, good wife, how do you employee, friend in this turmoil, with, you open up YouTube and it's, Israel did this and Iran did that and Ukraine's doing this and Russia's doing that. And here's the budget for the country that doesn't make any sense. And tax day was yesterday.
Yeah. Today.
Today.
It is today.
I paid my taxes.
It's today.
Today's tax day or yesterday?
If you're listening to this 2 days ago,
2 days was tax day. There's all of this stuff that's just like, man, where's the wisdom, for us as believers to how do we bring the kingdom to earth, and, know that God has everything taken care of.
And I think that what you were just talking about, if we want to become, let's say, just as an example, like a better husband, if we focus on, I just want to be a better husband, that can turn to legalism, and then maybe it'll change for a week. We'll change our ways. We'll do more dishes, whatever.
Yeah.
We'll watch less YouTube and be more interactive with our kids. That might last for 2 weeks, and then you go back. Yeah. But if you focus on spiritual transformation and say, I want to be more like Jesus, then again, hopefully everything else improves. And so, and I'm not saying it's a bad thing. Like, I want to be a better dad. I'm working on that. Yeah. But I guess it's to truly do that to the best of our abilities. It begins on a spiritual and an emotional level.
Yeah. Behavioral.
Address the underlying issues instead of just the behavioral problems. Instead of treating symptoms, we treat the core problem.
Yeah.
And I think that's this whole idea of spiritual depth and maturity. We just don't want to treat symptoms.
Right.
We want to treat what's at the core of that.
Yeah.
And then watch the transformation come out of the healing of those wounds.
Totally.
100%.
Yeah.
Look, we broke an hour. You're welcome, Aaron. If you're listening to this, Aaron, you better be. One hour.
You better have made it.
And I don't know why, Aaron, you're calling me randomly and hanging up, but I'll get a hold of you someday.
Oh man. Dude, I was just thinking yesterday, I didn't get to see the message. I was out with the baby, and I forgot to turn the TV on in the lobby.
Scott did a great job.
I heard he did a really good job.
I didn't listen to it yet either, but I'm going to. But he's a good guy.
That's why we did not talk about the sermon today.
That's right. Neither of us listened to it yet. But
by the time you listen to this, we've listened to the sermon.
I think I will have, yeah.
Probably.
That's awesome.
But dude, we just have... I'll pat you on the back. We have such a cool church.
I'm grateful, man. I'm grateful for our church, and I'm grateful for our community.
Yeah.
And I'm excited. I haven't been excited in a long time for seeing what God's going to do.
Yeah.
So I'm
that's good.
I have an excitement in me just to see people grow and to see how my excitement is to see how God uses that in other people.
Yeah.
One of my favorite movies is Cars 3. Children movies, why? Not overall, but my favorite children's movie is Cars 3.
Nice.
Have you seen Cars 3?
I don't know.
You got to watch it. It's phenomenal in leadership development. But the whole concept is Lightning McQueen invests into this young girl who is his trainer. No, she's not that young. I don't know how old she is. But she becomes a superstar racer, and he kind of passes the torch.
Oh, wow.
But he finds the most joy in watching his Padawan kind of succeed.
Oh, yeah.
And so I find the most joy in my pastoral career in seeing people grow and then seeing how God uses that in their community environments. So like in their workplace and their neighborhoods and stuff like that.
Yeah.
That's the stuff that encourages more than anyone like, Stephen, great message today. I'm like, hey, thank you, whatever. I appreciate that. But I more appreciate what's most encouraging to me is people are like, hey, I was practicing that breathing exercise. I'm like, dude, good job.
Yeah.
And like it helped me in work. Like I had a difficult meeting and then I felt like I was more in tune with God going into that. I'm like, dude, that's all I want.
It makes me think of that line from the documentary we quote all the time, where he gives that really good sermon, the Godspeed one.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Where he's like, I gave a great sermon, and he was like, could have been 15 minutes shorter.
Yeah.
And he's like, that's only a 10-minute sermon. He's like, people deserve more on a Sunday. He's like, no. People deserve more on a Monday.
Yeah,
yeah. I think that's the church, man.
100%.
I think that's it.
Yeah, I have a high value for the church and for our services and stuff like that, but I think it should be a catalyst and a place to grow into how you live your life on Monday and during the week.
I think that would be that'd be great. We should do that.
That's the goal, man. We do that the best when we slow down and we learn to be with God.
100%.
That's the stuff.
That's the stuff. Well, yeah.
Thanks, everybody.
We made it. We're back. We're back at the Spiritual Gap. It feels good.
It was a good episode. I enjoyed this episode.
Yeah, we were a little sporadic for a bit there. Christmas really knocked us off our feet, I think.
Yeah, Christmas, Easter, vacations, all that stuff. I think we're going to be pretty consistent for
the foreseeable future
yeah.
Until Christmas.
Yeah, unless Bryce goes to Bend or something. Who knows? Climbing a rock somewhere.
We record on Mondays, which is Brooke does teach on Mondays, but we record on Mondays, so it is one of those but now we record in the afternoon on Mondays. Really back with it.
Yeah, thanks for listening. Aaron, if you're not listening, I know Stevie is, so Stevie.
Thanks, Stevie.
Thank you.
Probably Ryan Unger.
Ronnie's probably listening.
Probably.
The trinity of the podcast listener, of the Spiritual Gap listener.
Trinity. We can say that, right?
Yeah, that's probably heresy.
They're the only ones that heard it, so...